text the person 10 math problems that they have to solve by text message every hour during the night is like a typical way
This
that they would do
100% sounds like a
recommended
Mr.
sleep.
Beast video.
This-
That's just, I mean, yeah.
I would not volunteer for this. Hit me, producer Potts.
So I was stalking your social media because I wanted to know what people have been asking you. And so I noticed this question, and it's a big nerdy question. So
I like this.
you know, it's a meaty one, but I've noticed a lot of people want to know, how does sleep and stress impact insulin? And then where does nutrient density, i.e. eating like a nutrivore diet, fall into the hierarchy of what makes the biggest impact? I know that's probably a big question, but people, I see they have been asking about it. So let's talk about it.
Yeah. So this is fascinating because I think that culturally, first of all, we want to blame people for their health problems, right? There's this whole, this is what healthism is, right? Healthism is the idea that you need to take personal responsibility. And if you have any health challenges, it's because you failed to take personal responsibility. So they must be your fault. And it just completely ignores genetics and epigenetics, access to medical care, social determinants of health, and like all of the things that we can't control, right? Access to a grocery store. What is our budget? How many jobs do we need to work to make ends meet? Like there's so many things that influence health beyond food. And then with insulin resistance, whether you're talking about PCOS or type 2 diabetes, right? There's this like idea that is your fault because you ate too much sugar, right? Or too much refined carbohydrates, right? That it is, this very simplistic idea that too much sugar in the bloodstream causes insulin resistance, or at least with type 2 diabetes, right? It is so much more complex than that. And diet is not as big of a contributor to insulin resistance as lifestyle factors, stress, sleep, and activity. So I'm pulling out all three of those because they all are really, really important in terms of like how they're influencing how much insulin is produced and how sensitive our cells are to insulin, and then how effective insulin is once it binds with its receptor in the cell at then getting the glucose transporter molecule into the cell membrane so that it can bring sugar into the cell. That is controlled by lifestyle. So this has been shown in a variety of studies. So for activity, activity is really cool because for a little while after we've done some exercise, our muscle cells can bring sugar basically into them without insulin. So there's this like really cool like little bypass of insulin in terms of like our muscles after working out that is beneficial. But there's also this whole collection of studies that this is what people volunteer for these studies. These are heroes in science. So there's this bunch of bed rest studies where they take healthy people and they say, you're not allowed to get out of bed for 3 days. Like bed.
I'll sign up for that study. That's right up my alley.
I imagine it would feel terrible after a little. Like you're not even allowed to get out of bed to go to the bathroom. Like they are bed rest studies.
Oh, that's no fun. No,
3 days, 3 to 5 days. And they show that just that like 3 days of bed rest causes.
Well, I don't know. Do we get the Netflix? Do we get the phones for scrolling?
I'm sure.
I don't know. I might. Anyways, go ahead.
I'm sure there. Well, also often when people volunteer for those types of studies, there's some kind of compensation. So yeah, typically they'll get paid. A couple $100.
It sounds like a YouTube challenge video. Not a big deal. Right.
Yes.
A Mr. Beast video, right? Okay, sorry, I interrupted you.
Except for the insulin resistance that is caused by that amount of.
That's not good. We don't want
that fast. So literally, we are not as sensitive to insulin, the effects of insulin, if we've been sick and been lying in bed for a few days. Once we like get up and get moving, like that can come back. Like it's not like a light switch that you turn it off and then it can never turn back on again. It's more like a dial, and it's very sensitive to all kinds of things. But so studies show that being sedentary basically makes our bodies less responsive to insulin. And then there's also a huge variety of studies that look at what's called short sleep. So people also volunteer for these studies where they're like only allowed to sleep. It's either like 4 or 5 or 6 hours usually. And sometimes it's fragmented sleep. So the fragmented sleep ones, they'll do things like text the person 10 math problems that they have to solve by text message every hour during the night is like a typical way
This
that they would do
100% sounds like a
fragmented
Mr.
sleep.
Beast video.
This
That's just, I mean, yeah.
I would not volunteer for this.
No, me neither. Sounds awful. Well, it
So
depends on how much money, but yeah, no.
it's true. Especially since
Okay, can we
can
back
reverse
up
it.
just a little bit? Because like you said movement, but then you said exercise, and like there's been
Oh
this
yes.
whole
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
on the internet about like walking as an exercise. So like how much movement are we talking about, like cleaning your house, or like how much movement do we need to have to where not have, like how much of a couch potato can we be is what I want to know.
So all movement counts. And actually, studies usually measure this by looking at insulin sensitivity. It's like one of the things that they'll look at for understanding like how at what point do the benefits of activity kick in. So literally there's been studies where they call them exercise snacks. So it's not like you're eating while you're exercising. It's these tiny little amounts of exercise. So they'll do things like have people walk up one flight of stairs, or do like a single bicep curl with like 3 seconds of effort, or do, a 10-second like sprint on the bike. And all of these show benefits. So benefits to insulin sensitivity, benefits to cardiometabolic fitness is another one, that like strength, like they'll measure that. And then sometimes they'll measure things like blood pressure or serum cholesterol. So the more consistently we move, obviously the better. Higher physical fitness, higher cardiometabolic fitness is definitely a good thing, but every bit of movement we do is contributing to that. So ideally, we would get 150 minutes per week of moderately intense activity. So that is a brisk walk would be considered moderately intense. So you can,
or like cleaning your tub, definitely, right?
Oh yeah, like a lot of gardening is sort of moderately intense.
What
Depending
would that work out to like per day? What's the math on that?
20, is it 22 minutes?
Oh, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, I mean
That's totally doable.
Let me just hang on. I should be able to do this in my head, but since it's 21.4 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm actually really impressed
like,
with myself for saying 22 minutes.
22. So if someone's like just starting out and they like are just starting out to get healthy, and happy, of course, but like I messed up my words up, but like if someone's just starting out, it can be as simple as like, just make sure over the course of the day you're moving 20 minutes, but that can be broken up into you getting up to do this and you getting up to do that. So it doesn't have to be like this intense thing to make an impact.
If you decided that walking was what your activity would be. So first of all, what's moderately intense walking for you is not the same as what's moderately intense walking for me. That is measured by the amount of exertion, not by how fast you're going. So,
cool.
A great way of gauging it is like how much you're like huffing and puffing. So moderately intense is I can say a whole sentence before I then have to like catch my breath. Vigorous would be I can only say a couple of words, like 2-3 words before I have to catch my breath. So if you're noticing you're breathing a little bit more, but you can say a whole sentence, you are in that moderate range. If you can like go on a full soapbox rant, it's probably more like mild activity. Mild activity is still beneficial, but that where the guidelines are, and it's well supported by the scientific literature, is 150 minutes per week as a minimum. So if your starting point is walking, around the block, and maybe that takes 5 minutes at your pace that is moderately intense for you, and that's all you can do. First of all, that's a great starting point. That's amazing. But you could do that 4 times in the day and you're going to hit those serving targets. It's not a serving, the exercise minute
The
target.
amount that we need to like not have issues
Yeah.
with our insulin from that one specific thing. Okay, so
Yeah.
I interrupted you and you were about to talk about sleep and insulin.
Yes.
And then we haven't even touched on stress. I know this is like a huge question, but I know that people have been asking about this. So if you don't mind.
No, I mean, this is
Okay.
fascinating stuff. And I think it's
Okay.
not very well understood because there's so much of like the low carb diet sort of propaganda out there that is like messaging that the solution is to change your diet, but actually lifestyle will get you even more like insulin sensitivity bang for your effort compared to diet changes. Doesn't mean diet's not important. Like definitely, we can also talk about some of the diet changes that can really help, but lifestyle is actually going to be a bigger magnitude
So
of
the
benefit.
sleep and stress and movement have more of an impact than what we're eating or not eating.
Correct.
Essentially.
Yeah.
That's really good to know. I think that's really helpful for people. Yeah.
So sleep is probably the hardest one for people to change because I feel like our society doesn't like respect sleep and isn't well set up for us to like prioritize sleep in our lives. But there was this one study, I think it was published in 2023, that it was done in dogs, I think. But they basically compared 6 months of like a very unhealthy diet and how that impacted insulin to 1 night of lost sleep, and showed 1 night of lost sleep had a worse, bigger impact on insulin sensitivity than 6 months of bad diet. There's a whole pile of studies in humans that have either had them do the short sleep, so like 4, 5, 6 hours for a few nights in a row, and shown that makes them more, not necessarily like full type 2 diabetes, but it makes them less sensitive to insulin. So insulin sensitivity is measured on a spectrum, and there's like a cutoff at which point it's called insulin resistance, and then there's another cutoff at which point it's called type 2 diabetes. So they'll measure that spectrum. So not getting enough sleep a few nights in a row causes us to be less sensitive to insulin. But even just like a single all-nighter will cause bad insulin sensitivity shifts. So getting enough sleep on a consistent basis, if I remember correctly, not getting enough sleep increases the risk of developing type 2 diabetes by like, maybe it's type 2 diabetes plus insulin resistance. It's a huge effect. It's like 2.5 times. I should let me find that study so I can actually quote it.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Let me find it. Okay, this is from a study out of Canada that was published in 2009. And it showed that sleeping less than 6 hours per night increased the risk of type 2 diabetes by 50%. And then when diabetes and impaired glucose tolerance were paired together, so that's like the in-between, so I'm insulin resistant, but it's not quite so bad enough to be type 2 diabetes yet, that sleeping less than 6 hours a night increased risk to 2.4 times. So
that's crazy.
That is a huge effect. And I feel like that's not something when someone gets a like diagnosis like, oh, hey, you're fasting insulin and blood sugar a little bit high, right? Like you get that often in your like annual blood work when you get a physical. It's not often that your doctor's going to go, do you get enough sleep? Maybe like work on seeing how you can restructure your day so that you're spending more time in bed, or maybe you have insomnia.
Now you're stressing me out about not getting enough sleep, and now I'm having stress. So like, it's
so
like
shifting to talking about stress.
It's like a thing, because like I don't know how many times you lay in bed and you're like, oh, I should be getting more sleep, and I'm not sleeping, and then you stress out about not sleeping. Like it's I feel like it's the vicious cycle, and then you're like, well, I'll just get up and be productive because at least I'll be doing something. You know what I mean? I feel like so many of us are like that.
That is true. But so sleep and stress have this vicious cycle because not getting enough sleep increases stress, and then being stressed erodes sleep quality, right? Makes it harder to sleep, makes it harder to stay asleep. But the cool thing is there's like a reverse good cycle with that. So I guess the other thing to say is that also chronic stress causes insulin resistance, and stress is another big risk factor for type 2 diabetes. Stress is like a much harder one to measure and get like exact, like the 2.4 times number, because we're all stressed. And like how stressed somebody is, there's ways that people will measure things like heart rate variability, but it's not as easy to measure as like how much sleep did you get? You know what I mean? Like how stressed are you is a much harder thing to answer because it's so dependent on how resilient you are as personality traits, but then also how much resilience have you built through life experience, like how many coping strategies that you have that are productive versus like maladaptive, right? Like stress is a hard one. So stress also it increases insulin resistance, and stress and sleep and activity, actually, they kind of all work together. So one of the things that we can do to reduce our stress is work on getting enough sleep. And the cool thing is that prioritizing sleep can then reduce stress, that can then make sleep better. So as much as they're like a vicious cycle that can work against us, they can be a really important, like positive feedback loop that works for us as well. So things that can help is getting some activity. So activity helps to reduce stress, but also has been shown to improve sleep quality. And it doesn't seem to matter what time of day we're active. Some studies show that being active right at the end of the day doesn't help, but some studies show that it does. It probably has to do with more of if that's your routine. Like routine exercise is good. Exercise that's kind of like if you're exercising really hard late at night and you're not used to it, that probably isn't as good. But then, if that's when it fits into your schedule, keep doing it. You will get used to it and then it will be good. So getting some activity can help reduce stress and improve sleep. Not eating right before bed can help to improve sleep. Spending some time outside can help to reduce stress and improve sleep. And that could be some active time. And then like there's legit good science behind mindfulness practice. It doesn't have to be like I'm sitting in the lotus position, like saying Om. Like mindfulness can be, there's a lot of different forms. So it can be meditative, but also there's a lot of mindful practices like writing in a gratitude journal or doing affirmations can be mindful practice. Like there's a lot of mindfulness practices that aren't meditation. So all of those things have been shown to help improve sleep quality and reduce stress. So it's kind of one of those things that like if you think about it holistically and if you think about how they all fit together, they can all help each other. And that's also where nutrition can fit into the equation. So eating a higher quality diet, getting more nutrients can help to improve sleep, can help to regulate the stress response, and can help to improve insulin sensitivity. So there's a collection of nutrients that when we're not getting enough of it, that does contribute to insulin resistance. I talk about vitamin D and chromium in the book and how vitamin D and chromium both are really, really important for insulin sensitivity and reducing risk of type 2 diabetes, as well as other issues associated with insulin resistance like PCOS. But also the stress response, it can be modulated by nutrients. I talk about vitamin C, how getting enough vitamin C, and actually maybe even more than the daily value of vitamin C, can help to regulate stress in the book. The other nutrient that's really tied with stress is, or nutrients, is magnesium and omega-3 fats, like what we're getting from seafood. So those have all been shown to help to regulate the stress response. They're also on the list of nutrients that can improve insulin sensitivity. And, there's multiple different pathways, right? Nutrients are used for many, 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 sometimes hundreds of different things in the body. So where nutrients can fit in is by helping to regulate the stress response and help to support all of the various physiology of sleep, and then also help things like muscle recovery if we're going to start an exercise program to help there as well. So that's where nutrients fit into the whole shebang. Regulating insulin is much more about the important vitamins and minerals that we need for insulin to do all of the things that it does than it is about eating too much sugar, right? Like I hope that is the take home here, is that
Yeah.
the simplistic view of like, you got type 2 diabetes because you ate too many donuts or whatever. It's so complex. It's much more closely tied to lifestyle than to diet. It's much more about what's missing in the diet, right? Like the nutrient dense foods, getting enough vitamin C and magnesium and omega-3 fats and vitamin D, than it is about what there is too much in the diet. And it's also linked to social determinants of health, to genetics. Like there's parts of this that are outside of our control. Like you can
Right.
do everything right. You can have the perfect sleep, perfect activity, perfect stress management, perfect diet, whatever that is. All of the nutrients. You can, not smoke, not drink, right? Like all of those things can be dialed in. And that's at best 40 to 50% of health outcomes. That means there's still 50 to 60% of things that are controlling what happens to you health-wise, what your like health outcomes are going to be, that you do not have control over.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't mean that we don't want to give up on diet and lifestyle. That doesn't mean that that's pointless, right?
Right.
But I think it's helps to understand when you're putting a lot of effort into diet and lifestyle and then something not good happens, it's not your fault. There's things that happen outside of our control. Yeah, it's a little bit scary, but also what I think of that as really empowering information, because 40 to 50% is totally worth it, right? That is worth
It's a
the
lot.
effort. Yeah, it's a huge chunk. That's worth the effort I'm going to put into living a healthier lifestyle and eating a higher quality diet. But also, it doesn't mean it's all my fault, right? It doesn't mean like, yes, I don't have complete control, but that control was always an illusion, right? And it means that if something happens to me health-wise, I don't need to blame myself for it. I don't need to see it
Yeah.
as my fate, which is actually where we started answering this question.
No,
Was
I love
that
how you
thought.
bring it all the way back to the beginning. And then I just want to point out is like, a lot of people know you for your daily morning walks that you take us on together, and that's your time outside. That's your exercise. That's your stress reliever because you're with your dog and dogs are relieving stress, right? So
Especially
like,
mine.
we just need to be more like Dr. Sarah and do morning walks outside and we'll be great. We'll be
I
great.
am very privileged to live so close to such lovely green space, and I
Yeah.
wish everyone was so fortunate as to live close
Well, that
to
can
green
fall
space like
into
that.
that social determinants of health,
For
right?
sure.
Like
Yeah.
access to free park space nearby, right? Like not everyone has that. A lot of people live in concrete jungles, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah, no, that's great. Well, you already talked a lot about where people can learn about this stuff in your book. So I guess the thing is to tell people to go buy your book. So go buy the book, everybody. And thanks, Dr. Sarah.
Thank you.